In 1484, just under 30 years, just under 30 years after the Gutenberg Bible left the famous printing house in Mainz, the Ashkenazi Soncino family in Italy printed the first 2 volumes of the Talmud's Editiones Principes, tractates Berakhot and tractate Yom Tov. Beitzah. These were not the first Hebrew books ever printed, but they became among the most famous and among those responsible for the iconic design of the Talmud page until today. In the center of the page, the Talmudic text itself was arranged. Mishnah followed by Gemara, Rashi's commentary on one side and the Tosafot on the other. At the end of the tractate, other medieval commentators. The Piskei Tosafot were printed, a medieval Ashkenazi summary of the legal conclusions drawn from the Tosafot discussion, followed by the Mordechai, and after that Maimonides' commentary on the Mishnah. At the end of the thin volume, and afterward, by the proofreader was added. Many historical discussions have examined the influence of this edition on subsequent editions and on generations of learners. However, the question of the edition's necessity and efficiency at the time of its appearance has not yet been discussed. That is the question of the purpose of printing the edition, not as a pioneering print edition, but as a practical book for which there was a demand in northern Italy in 1484. In his 2009 book, Authorship and Publicity Before Print, Daniel Hobbins shows that from the beginning of the 15th century, a sharp increase in the number of manuscripts produced in Europe is evident. According to Hobbins, the invention of printing press by Gutenberg in the middle of the century met the growing demand for books. Can you see my? No, you can't see. You can see the Bible was printed by Gutenberg around here, somewhere here, in the middle of the increase. As shown in the graph, this demand was initially met by increased manuscript production. But within few years, the printing industry displaced manuscript production and became the primary means of book production. We can explain this phenomenon when you think about the fall in LP production in the 19th century, which some of us still remember. The LP was invented in 1948, just before the beginning of the graph, and there was an increase until here in 1980, the graph fall, not because people stopped listening to music, but because it was replaced by cassette and compact disc, MP3, and all the things that we do today in order to hear music. Here we face a historical gap. If printed books were created to replace hand-copied books, we would expect the first incunabula to be very similar to latest manuscripts, and indeed many incunabula are quite similar to manuscripts. They contain neither title page, no page number, no index, and no other paratext known from the first generations of print. Even their fonts usually imitate handwritten ones, as we have seen today in early presentations. But the first editions of the Talmud are more challenging to explain. We do not have even one surviving manuscript of the Talmud that contain all the components of this edition: Gemara, Rashi, Tosafot, Piskei Tosafot, Mordechai, and Maimonides' commentary on the Mishnah. Note that I am not talking about the layout of the page, the Tzurat Daf, which in my eyes is a non-issue and an unimportant subject for research. And if you like, I explain that later. But rather about the unique composition of work that combine the edition, which is an important question for research. Thus, the question returns with greater force. What demand was this edition supposed to answer? For whom was it designed? Or, in other words, into what literary and scholarly world did it enter? I will devote my lecture today to the question of the context for which the Soncino Talmuds were printed, focusing on the first 8 tractates printed in the first 5 years of the printing house operation, between 1484 and 1489, which have survived. The bibliography of the Soncino editions, and specifically the Soncino editions of the Talmud, has been written several times during the study of the history of the Hebrew book. Most recently by Shimon Yakerson, who was mentioned today earlier, in the catalog of the Jewish Theological Seminary. I will summarize here the details of the findings relevant to our matter. Tractate Berakhot, Yakerson 20, was published with 2 colophons, each citing a different date. The first date was noted in the first colophon, written by the printer Yoshua Natan Soncino. Yeshua Nathan writes that he joined the various works together so that learners would not need other books for study. And I finish it here. City of Soncino, today, the 20th of the month of Tevet, mid-January, in the year Gemara. The year Gemara states in the Gematria for 14, it's equivalent to 1483. Yeshua Solomon, son of Israel Nathan, man of Soncino. This colophon was written in the 20th of Tevet, January, or Tevet, 1483, 1484, with the completion of the holy work, meaning the end of the printing. But on the next page, a second colophon was printed, written by another person, Gabriel ben Aaron Strasbourg. We heard about him in Yoram Beaton's lecture earlier. Gabriel Strasbourg opens with praises for Israel Nathan Soncino efforts to spread Torah in Israel, and recounts how he commanded his son. How he commanded his son, Yeshua Solomon, to prepare a Gemara. Yeshua Solomon obeyed his father's command, began with tractate Berakhot, and after finishing the printing, brought it before Gabriel Strasbourg for review. And then, after the completion of this composite work, it was brought before me, and I rejoiced greatly upon seeing the splendor and quality of this composition. In order to ensure that its desirability and elegance attain full perfection, I read it from beginning to end and found it free of any defect, with its textual precision complete in the highest degree. And it was signed Friday, the 1st of the month of Adar Rishon, around March, in the year Gemara, 1484, the little one, Gabriel ben Aaron Strasbourg. This colophon was written a few months after Yeshua Solomon's colophon. From Gabriel Strasbourg's explicit words, after the work that the composition was finished, it is clear that the printing was already complete and that he saw printed pages before him. Indeed, Jacobson found that the last 2 pages on which Gabriel Strasbourg's second colophon was printed are not part of the sequence of choirs and were added later, at the end of the printing work. In the copy found in the JTS library, these pages are missing. But if so, for what purpose did Rabbi Gabriel Strasbourg examine them? After all, if the edition was already printed, it can no longer be corrected. Thanks God that it found free of any defect, with its textual precision complete in the highest degree. Wink, wink. The solution to the riddle becomes clear from the second colophon Gabriel Strasbourg wrote, the colophon for the other tractate, for tractate Beitzah. In this colophon, Gabriel ben Aaron Strasbourg described how he was asked to prepare a copybook, which we discussed earlier today, a new copy in Yoram's presentation, a new copy of the Gemara for tractate Beitzah, with Rashi, Tosafot, and Mordechai, arranged together in preparation for the print layout. Then Gabriel Strasbourg delivered this manuscript copy to the printers, who printed it. When they finished, they brought back the printed book, and again I rejoiced greatly upon seeing the excellence and quality of the composition, and I found it free of any defect, with its textual precision complete in the highest degree. Of course, since it was now very hard and expensive to correct anything. This one also signed in the same day of the tractate Berakhot, of the first tractate, Friday, the 1st of month of Adar Rishon, 1484. Now the order of events becomes clear. The full edition of tractate Berakhot was printed in the 20th of Tevet, December 1493, and the copy was then delivered to Gabriel Strasbourg for inspection, which of course went well. Simultaneously, Gabriel was asked to prepare tractate Beitzah in the same way. Strasbourg prepared the draft for the new copy of tractate Beitzah, delivered it to the printers, who added to it, printed it, and then delivered that too for inspection to Gabriel. Lo and behold, no flaw was found in either. Gabriel Strasbourg signed the letter of approval for Berakhot and colophon for tractate Beitzah on the same very day, 6th of Adar, March 1484. Thus, although tractate Berakhot was already ready in the 20th of Tevet, both tractates left the printing house together in Adar. But why did Yeshua Solomon Soncino need to wait for Gabriel Strasbourg approval for tractate Berakhot? Why couldn't he release tractate Berakhot on the 20th of Tevet in December, independently of tractate Beitzah? And why, if he already knew the craft and how to prepare the tractate for printing, did he need to hire Gabriel Strasbourg's services? These questions lead to the main subject of my inquiry, the new edition's target audience. Who they were and why they would buy this strange new product, a printed multi-text edition of the Talmud. Rabinovich, in his article on the printing of the Talmud, which was the first book to describe all these entangled history of the printing of the Talmud, correctly described the sequence of events, but characterized the tangle of motivations as follows. The edition of tractate Berakhot was fully printed and only saw the light with Gabriel Strasbourg approval because the printers did not want to mislead the public by selling a book without proofreading. However, this interpretation does not align with our observations. First, Gabriel Strasbourg could not correct anything in it, so no changes could be made to the tractate's content. More importantly, the idea that there is a public waiting for the tractate and judging its quality according to its best judgment fits a world when printing is already a stable and permanent factor, and the target audience has specific expectations, not a world where printed books are a new phenomenon. For comparison, when the first smartphone entered the market, no one judged it for technical performance, as there was nothing yet to compare it to. It was judged by the intermediaries responsible for its distribution, whose goal was to convince customers that such a new thing was even necessary. We must assume that the decision to delay the distribution for tractate Berakhot until March was made for one of two reasons. Either because of Gabriel Strasbourg's authoritative personality, or to release two tractates together as a pair. In fact, not only the first two tractates printed in a pair, the next 6 tractates printed in Soncino were also printed in pairs. After Berakhot and Beitzah came Ketubot and Gittin, Baba and Baba Metzia, and Chulin and Nida. Thank you so much. In these 6 tractates, the editor of the edition was not Gabriel Strasbourg, but one, David ben Elazar, Sagan Levia. We'll hear about him later today and tomorrow. Knowledge is an institutional configuration. It is created, organized, and regulated institutionally. And the first printing of the Talmud is of no exception. From the words of the colophon, it is clear that Yeshua Solomon Soncino is aware that he has produced a novel book in terms of its composition, unlike any before it, and that he must explain its purpose. His goal, as he explained at length, is to render unnecessary the need to consult many books and to bring before the learner the composition required for study in order to, bring to light from the matters of the tractate a righteous judgment. Naturally, it is understood that the gathering of the compositions in question is subject to a specific order of study. I suggest that the Soncino's Talmud should be understood not as an unfinished attempt to print a complete set of Talmud, but as a printing intent to serve an educational institution. My claim is that the printing of the 2 tractates together on the 6th of Adar was done solely to provide study material for an educational institution. The answer to the identity of the institution should be sought in 2 places: the social status of the editor and the fact that the 2 tractates appear together. Let's start specifically with the latter fact, the printing of the tractates in pair. The Soncino edition is an Ashkenazi edition. The Soncino family were distinguished Ashkenazim who took pride in the fact that one of their great-great-grandfather is mentioned in the Tosafot of Tuch, as Gershom Soncino wrote on the title page of his edition, Michlol, printed in Constantinople. I didn't find the name of this Shapira person in Tosafot Tuch. If anyone knows where it is in the Tosafot, I would love to know. Indeed, the institution where tractates were studied in such pairs was the Ashkenazi yeshiva. This institution was born in the days of the Tosafists in the 12th century France and took its main shape and development during the 15th century under the hands of Maharil, Rabbi Israel Iserlen, Mahari Weil, Mahari Bruna, Mahari Cologne, Mahari Mainz, their students and their students' students. Its beginning was on the soil of the Holy Roman Empire, and its end, after the great migration of the mid-15th century, was on the soil of Poland on one hand, and in the area of the printing press in northern Italy in our case. We have many testimonies. The tractates were studied in pairs at the Ashkenazi yeshiva. The best evidence comes from the mid-15th century book Minhagei Maharil, the customs of Maharil. Maharil was a great sage of the 15th century Germany. There, Rabbi Zalman of St. Gouard, the author of the Minhagim, writes as follows. When the young students ate with him, with Maharil, with the rabbi, at a celebratory meal marking the completion of their study, which he held annually during the holidays of Sukkot for 2 tractates studied during the summer, and likewise during the holidays of Passover for the two tractates studied during the winter, or on Lag BaOmer, which is actually tonight, the rabbi would cut the bread and act as this and add that. The main point of the passage is Maharil custom regarding sharing bread for the meal, but by the way, we learned that the young men who studied with Maharil in the yeshiva dined with him 3 times a year in official meals during Chol HaMoed Sukkot for the completion of 2 tractates of the summer session, which called also the summer time, the Zman Kaitz, during Chol HaMoed Pesach for the completion of 2 tractates studied during the winter in Zman Choref, and on Lag BaOmer, which is tonight. The division of the yeshiva year in Ashkenaz into 2 semesters of study, summertime and wintertime, is well documented, and as Israel Yuval showed, it also had a regulatory aspect, a semester tax, Schulergeld, paid twice a year for the right to maintain such a yeshiva. In 1509, Elijah Kapsali of Crete arrived at the Ashkenazi yeshiva of Padua and reported in detail on its arrangements. Among other things, he told how, in the end of the time, in the end of the Zman of the semester, the students would be released, and the married one and those with commitments would travel back to their homes, while the bachelors remained in the yeshiva. On the 1st of Nisan and the 1st of Tishrei, the end of the winter and end of the summer, periods referred to as between the terms, Ben Zmanim, attendance to the yeshiva was suspended due to the festivals. Some rabbis and students who had come from distant regions of the state of study, who left their wives and children behind, would then travel home for the festivals, returning to the place of communities in order to rejoice on their homes with their wives and children. In each such Zman semester, 2 tractates were studied. The course of the study was divided into 2 parallel frameworks. In the morning hours, a lesson called the Halacha, or Perush Zman, was given. In the Perush, the commentary was the commentary of Rashi, the most basic commentary to the Talmud. This was the basic lesson in Talmud with Rashi. In the afternoon, the advanced lesson, Tosfot Zman, took place. Marie Coulon distinguishes between the basic and the valued study of the Perush Zman, aimed to learning the plain meaning of the Talmud with Rashi, and the paths, or hadrachim, meaning the free, individual, and more creative reasoning brought up in the Tosafot Zman. I'm sorry, I will not read in detail every word here. You can see yourself. Kapsali tells about these lessons as follows. This was the order of the study. In the morning after leaving the yeshiva, they were engaged in dialectical analysis with other scholars. He would sit in his home and teach legal material to those incapable of sustained analytical study. He was not obligated to teach them at fixed hours. After the meal, toward the evening, the advanced and intellectually sharp students would also arrive, and he would teach them Tosafot. Thus, in the morning, the Halacha, and as the evening shadows lengthen, the Tosafot. Alongside these 2 lessons, we note there also existed an advanced weekly lesson called Pilpul HaYeshiva, which was documented in detail by Elijah Kapsali and analyzed by my teacher, Elchanan Reiner, which was conducted without books at all. The decision to release 2 printed tractates at once fits the Ashkenazi Yeshiva study tradition across its generation. Berakhot and Beitzah were printed on the 6th of Adar, 1484, toward the summer semester of that year. The next 2 tractates were printed, like the first 2, in the winter of 1488. They were bound together in most of the copies known today. Ketubot was printed on the 20th of Kislev, November, and Gittin on the 6th of Adar, March, again toward the end of the winter semester. A year later, apparently, 2 tractates were printed again on the same day, the eve of Passover, 14th of Nisan, April. Bava Kama and Baba Metzia were printed with the added apology, noting that everything was done at the last moment to make them available in time for the summer semester of 1489. In that same year, 1482, 2 summer tractates were also printed, so they would be ready for time in time for the holidays. Chulin on the 15th of Tammuz, July, and Nida on the 25th of Av, which is August. Now let's examine the identity of those engaged in the work. The Strasbourg family was a family of French Jews who arrived in Italy from Chambry, France, in the first half of the 15th century, and became part of the rabbinic elite among the Jews of northern Italy. The Strasbourg family had several sons, all of whom studied in various yeshivot, and some were involved in the production of Hebrew books as copyists and printers. Since it is clear that Yehoshua Solomon Soncino knew the craft of producing Hebrew books, it is reasonable to assume that the recruitment of Gabriel Strasbourg for the work of preparing tractate Yom Tov and approving tractate Berakhot was not merely additional manpower, but relates to his status. And this status, I wish to hypothesize, was related to his role in a specific Ashkenazi yeshiva. This is evident because in the end, because he is the one who enabled and perhaps also requested the dual production of Berakhot and Beitzah together on the 6th of Adar, just before the end of the winter session. We do not know for sure in which yeshiva Gabriel Strasbourg studied or taught, but we may have a trace of it. In the early days of printing, it was customary to print a few copies of every book in a more festive and expensive way than other copies, on parchment. Such parchment copies are usually found on the hands of those close to the printing house, sometimes the commissioners of the work or its patrons. Such copy of the Soncino Talmud with Berakhot and Beitzah bound together and printed on parchment is currently in the collection of the Bodleian Library in Oxford. And on it is a clear ownership list of two sons of Maharam of Padua. You can see it here. Naum Yitzchak ben Moharar Meir Katzenelbogen on the up there. You might see it better, just above Masechet Berakhot. And his brother, Binyamin, just down there. Binyamin ben Ladoni Avi Moharar Meir, Binyamin son of Meir, just down there. If the attributed copy indeed testifies to the yeshiva from which the two tractates were printed, then the tracts lead us to the great yeshiva of Padua, the home institution of Mahari Cologne, Mahari Mainz, and Maharam of Padua. The connection between the Soncino printing house and the Padua yeshiva is further strengthened by the identity of the proofreader of the next 6 tractates. In these tractates, the report on the proofreading work was much more detailed and already follows the humanistic principle of text processing and production, as I show in my Hebrew book, Edit Your Princeps, and as I will demonstrate tomorrow in the lecture in the teaser about the Bomberg press. The proofreader for the printing was David Sgan Levia, also known as David Pitzikton, who was a student of Maharil. Here you can see him signing his name in the end of Chulin. David ben Elazar Halevi, and he was the one that also corrected the Talmud Yerushalmi manuscript that we will speak about tomorrow with a lot of marginalia and preparing him for the print that you can see in the original here behind you or here, reading the copy that it was printed from, the Leiden manuscript of the Talmud Yerushalmi. More details about it tomorrow. He was a student, this David Pitzikton was a student of Mahari Mainz in Padua, and after Mahari Mainz's passing, he competed with Mainz's son, Abraham, for the yeshiva leadership in the democratic vote of 1509, which Rabbi Eliezer Kapsali reported in detail. He lost, as is the way of the world, to Abraham Mainz. Nepotism was not invented by universities. And later, David Pitzikton became rabbi in Ferrara and was appointed the chief proofreader of the Palestinian Talmud. Thus, I wish to suggest that Gabriel Strasbourg and David ben Elazar were representative of the Padua yeshiva, and they were sent to the Soncino printing house to produce textbook for the yeshiva. For this reason, we should not think about the printing as a production intended for a free book market with demand, but as a production intended for one specific educational institution, the Padua yeshiva. Printing on demand for study at the Padua yeshiva can also help solve another problem. Not 20 years passed since Berakhot and Beitzah were printed, and both were printed again, this time in Pisa in 1509 by Gershom Soncino. One of the tractates can also be seen there, the 1508, I think, Talmud on the other side of the showcase. There is no point in reprinting a book that was already been printed, especially when the entire Talmud had not yet been printed, unless the purpose of the printing was not to complete a full set, but to serve a specific didactic need of a certain institution. And still, the question of the edition's novelty remains. After all, the Ashkenazi Talmud lesson was strictly traditional matter. What did the Talmud lessons in the yeshiva look like before the arrival of these printed Gemaras, these printed books? In other words, what void was the print product supposed to fill? As recalled, 2 regular lessons were in the weekly study order: Perush Zman, for study of only Talmud, and Tosafot Zman, study of all the rest. Both of these were textual lessons in which they learned from books, but which books? Within the Vatican collection, there is a group of about 30 Talmudic manuscripts, all of which were part of the Old Palatine collection, found between Vatican Beitzah 108 to roughly 135, which you can see in front of you, part of them. Almost all of them were created in the same cultural area we are talking about, Ashkenaz of after the Black Death, and all have similar composition. They hold only the Talmud, usually arranged in 2 columns. In this collection, the Talmud is accompanied by Rashi commentary very rarely, but in many manuscripts, young students added a few notes from Rashi along the Talmud to make the task of reading the Talmud a bit easier. There are also some manuscripts very similar of only Rashi, and some other manuscripts of only Tosafot. I did, when I was in the Vatican, I did this exercise of ordering Talmud and Rashi and Tosafot to imitate medieval learning, and after that I did the exercise a couple of times with students, which was opened our eyes for a lot of medieval phenomena of learning. It was wonderful. Tosafot on the Gemara itself is found at all, not only in the Vatican, in all of Europe, only in 2 known cases from all of Europe, cases that are exceptional in many ways. Both of them are not in the Vatican collection, and I suspect both were not created in or for a yeshiva context. One is the Gittin of Ara, and the other, Judith Schlanger studied it in detail, and the other one is in Oxford, the Talmud of Nashim. Both of them are more like kind of coffee table books and not meant for real study. So I'll show you a couple of them. This is our regular Talmud page was looking in North Italy or Ashkenaz in 15th century. 2 columns copied that. This is one of the only copies of Talmud with Rashi. This is same thing. This is Vatican Beitzah 140. I don't remember which tractate. And here you can see a Talmud with one of the young students copying comments from Rashi all around. This is a very young student. He explains very simple phrases which he needs to in order to keep on studying. These are manuscripts of Rashi alone. That's why they are called kuntres or booklet. It was held separately. And these are manuscripts of Tosafot, which were also had a different appearance, and you could see from afar what are they. The Talmud manuscript from the Vatican collection, which contain only Talmud, sometimes with Rashi, are books for Perush Zman. In contrast, the Tosafot Zman, they studied from a variety of books. The Tosafot, for example, were copied into a separate book, and Rashi was also copied separately. That's why he was called Kuntres. I'm sorry, I'm repeating myself. In Leket Yosher, which is one of the beautiful testimonies of 15th century learning, Rabbi Yospa Osterreicher, a student of Mahari Iserlen, wrote in the second half of the 15th century, he told that his teacher, custom, laying each book separately out of respect to them, and even mentioned the student's custom in Mahari Iserlen Yeshiva to place one open book after another. So he was putting each book separately, but it's a book full of memories from it was written mostly in Italy after he left the yeshiva in Germany. So he's writing, well, I remember as follows. I recall during yeshiva study, students would place commentaries and Tosafot upon the Gemara for purpose of study, which sometimes resulted in damage the Gemara or to the Poskim. In one book was deleting the script of the other one. Discussion arose concerning how could it be permissible to damage books, and the Gaon, which is a rabbi, he replied, for this purpose they were originally written, this is what they are for. Another thing, we hear a lot from Lechet Yoshua about the reality of how they were handling physical books. In another passage he said, I also recall students in the yeshiva would throw Tosafot to one another. At times he would object and say, sacred writing are not to be thrown. I can just, this is for the movie HBO will produce about the yeshiva of the 15th century. It's a wonderful scene. Many Talmudic manuscripts of whom the Vatican collection bears signs indicating they were the textbooks in the Ashkenazi yeshiva and were studied around the aforementioned semester-based study cycle. For example, this manuscript of Tosafot Chulin, Vatican 159, contain ownership records of Yochanan ben Yosef, who studied in the yeshiva of Pio Vedesako in the summer semester of 1461. It was before they printed the Rashi of Pio Vedesako. And Moshe Bar Salmon studied in the yeshiva of Mestre in the summertime of 1505 and wrote his name on it. Oh, this lovely poem, written by Seligman, a yeshiva student, in the end of Bava Kama, Vatican 116, upon his departure for Passover vacation in the end of the semester. And he wrote as follows. At the end of the term is being called to every free person, it's time to return home. Blessed he is released the bound. It's very beautiful in Hebrew, it's rhymed. I will read it in Hebrew. סוף הזמן קוראים לכל בני חורין, לבתיהם חוזרים, ברוך מתיר אסורים. סוף הזמן יפרח, אורו לרום מזרח, ממערב גם ממזרח, על כל, אני פנחס בן רבי משה, נקרא סליגמן. I am Pinchas, son of Moses, blessed memory known as Seligman. Thus we have before us a fine collection of Perush Zman books, whereas for the Tosaf Zman there is no need for dedicated Talmud, but for a selection of books, perhaps I would even dare to say a full library. As we call, the Yoshua Solomon Soncino wrote in the Berakhot colophon that he saw fit to share these lovely compositions together, so that it would be possible to encompass all the great inquiries and heart searchings necessary to bring in light the righteous judgments of the tractates matters. Indeed, in the tractates Berakhot and Beitzah, Gemara, Rashi, Tosafot, Piskei Tosafot, Mordechai, and Maimonides' commentary and the Mishnah were arranged in one volume. But why bother so much? Or better, according to what model or what principle was this effort made? There is not a single manuscript of the Talmud that contains all these works together, despite the clear traditional institutional context. There is a novelty here, and this novelty must be explained. Now, the edition exact goal is still a riddle to me, but this riddle, in my opinion, can begin to be solved through a beautiful finding found in the Bodleian library. This is the book catalogued under the title Collection of Novellae and Rulings, which I ordered and opened entirely by chance. I saw it from my period, 15th century, and then I said, well, let's look. The writer's name is Seligman Bing. I'll just show you. Sam, can you play the video? It's now. Can you play the video? You can see me going through the pages. It's very beautifully arranged. Okay, I'll describe it while you're watching me. It's amazing to see how complicated these pages are. The writer's name is Seligman Bing. He was a grandson of Rabbi Menachem Tzioni, author of famous commentary on the Torah, and son-in-law and student of Maharil, Talmudic scholar, but not the very first rank. He was likely born around 1395 and spent his life moving between the Rhine region and northern Italy. He held yeshivot in several places, small ones apparently. I find no person who defined himself as his students. He sat for a time in Andernach and later in Bingen. Between 1459 and 1460, he was a rabbi in Oppenheim, after which he returned to Bingen. In the early 70s, he went south to Italy, to the Mestre area, where he died in 1472, 12 years before the printing of the Soncino edition. The book is an autograph. The book is an autograph, and as far as I could trace, it's wondering it remained in Oppenheim and may have entered there the David Oppenheim's collection, from which it reached the Bodleian Library in Oxford. This is a personal notebook in which he documented and summarized his own learning. Before you is a video showing from bird's eye view how complex the layout of every single page of this book with its 250-something pages is. The book covers the tractates Avodah Zarah, Shvuot, and Sanhedrin for the Talmud. The Mishnah and the Talmud are presented in full and central, interpreted text, integrated with Rashi commentary as if they were one text. For example, I mean, this is the Mishnah, and but only the blue parts are the real Mishnah. All the rest is Rashi commentary, which is integrated totally into the text. Alongside the interpreted text, the author added many windows, passages of Tosafot, commentaries, traditions from Maharil, halachic responsa from Maharam of Rothenburg, stories and novellae, independent scholarly question of his own, most of them open question with no answer, lines of thought that had only begun to be considered, thought experiments, and wonders about the world in light of the Talmudic issues or about the Talmud in light of events in the world. Note the graphic form in which all the material is organized on the page by one author in an autograph as a kind of personal learning diary. Initially, it is neatly managed, but very quickly it becomes a record of associative fragmented thought, though highly organized. When the sections multiply, as you can see, here I did one page that just show what are each paragraph. So only the blue one is the Talmud. The red ones are Tosafot, or medieval commentators, and the green one are later the Mordechai, or later medieval Ashkenazi Tosafot. All the yellow ones are his own queries and questions. He's signing them Hakatan, the small one. Most of them are open questions. How could it be that this is that way or that way? Some of them are Talmud Yerushalmi, some of them are Maimonides, and some of them are responsa from Maharam of Rothenburg. You can see when the question multiply, see how he's starting, he's like finishing one column with a small face, and then he had to he goes to the next one, and I mean, this face is continuing here, while this symbol goes up to here, and the hands here are going to the next page. It's very complex page. Is trying to arrange it, but without great success. I'll leave the one. Never mind. Okay, I'll just jump a bit further. I'm still studying this book, and my conclusions are not yet final. On the one hand, it is already clear that this is a very personal book. On the other hand, it is addressed at least rhetorically to the reader. He writes here, I shall write the interpretation explicitly so that the reader may proceed swiftly and understand, and so on. The thought I carry, so there is some kind of reader that he's thinking about. The thought I carry with me as I read this book is that if the Vatican collection Talmuds are Peruzman Talmuds, and if the Tosafot Zman lesson, the learners have a collection of works before them, this is a sort of a personal Talmud that helps the teacher prepare to teach Tosafot Zman. That is a processed Talmud ready for the study of the advanced lesson in Talmud, and therefore it resembles the need that the printed Talmuds aim to fulfill. Or maybe the other way around. This is what a rabbi who has no student is writing instead of teaching a Tosafot Zman lesson. Nevertheless, perhaps before us is kind of a missing link that might explain the necessity, or at least the scholarly tradition, upon which the Soncino Talmuds were cast. Thank you very much.